Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is Friday morning, 11:02 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and welcome to episode 27 of McRae Live. Where are you in the world? I am broadcasting from the VoiceMann Studios in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and man, today I just want to talk about the future of the slasher genre. I hear this a lot. Like I hear it from people a lot, talking about, what do you think? I mean, where's the slasher genre going? Do you think we're ever going to get another? One of the biggest questions I get is, do I think we will ever have another new iconic slasher villain that will embed itself into the ether, or into the zeitgeist, I should say, and into the pop culture consciousness right up there, that maybe might be on the Mount Rushmore of slasher genre villains. Although Mount Rushmore, I mean, I'm Canadian, so forgive me, but I believe there's only, 4 heads on Mount Rushmore? 4 or 5 heads? No more than 5, right? I think 4 or 5. So, I mean, that's not a lot to choose from. There's not a lot of room there. But the way I look at it is in order to really know where the slasher genre is going, Frank says 4 and gives me a little check mark. Why, thank you, Frank. To know where the slasher genre is going and what the future of the slasher genre could be, we sort of have to understand where it came from. And this is my opinion, but it's an informed one, and basing it on sort of the evidence that's at hand. And it's very apparent to me as the horror genre moves forward. And I'm talking about just the specific horror genre. I mean, there's a lot of sort of crossovers. There's sci-fi horror, and then of course you have all the subgenres of horror, but not sci-fi horror. I'm not talking about science fiction and fantasy. Just purely horror movies. We have to remember that the slasher genre is largely defined by a few different tropes that you generally see. And it really started to make its way into the pop culture, even though the term slasher wasn't really, it wasn't a big thing back then. But of course, with the movies like Peeping Tom and Psycho in 1960, these were sort of the movies that began. Peeping Tom and Psycho in 1960 were sort of the movies that opened that door to, especially Psycho. I mean, Peeping Tom is sort of a, not a lot of people have heard of that. And it's not like it was this gigantic, massive success. We're talking, Psycho was one of those movies that sort of opened the window and opened the door to what's possible in the scary movie genre. And, things really took off in the early 1970s. And the golden age of slasher, because that's what we're talking about today, slasher movies. The golden age of slasher really started with Halloween and ended in about 1985-86. So it wasn't that long, okay? There was a very strong short window there. But we also have to remember that the landscape of the entertainment industry and movies was changing. I mean, we largely have we have to give thanks to George Lucas and Steven Spielberg for that. I mean, Spielberg, Lucas too, but certainly Spielberg more so because he directed more influential films. Spielberg changed, you've heard me say this, changed the way movies were made. Changed the way we viewed cinema and the movie-going experience. He invented the blockbuster. And so not only from 1978 to 1985, let's say, was the slasher subgenre, or the slasher genre, horror movies. Because really, as you've heard me say, I mean, there were still different types of horror movies at that time. But when you thought of horror in 1978, 79, certainly 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, you generally defaulted to slasher. I mean, that is really what horror was at that time, was just slasher movies. Even though there were other types as well. Those were the movies that were very popular and were tearing it up at the box office. But there was another, it wasn't just the horror genre that was evolving and sort of finding its own. I mean, movies, like I said, how we view entertainment. The 80s was just a changing decade for that. So it wasn't a big window. I mean, 1978 to 1984, 5, somewhere around there. And then once you got into the later 80s, the slasher subgenre started its decline. Now, it didn't, by 1986, 87 or so, it wasn't at the bottom of the barrel. But by the time Candyman came out in 1992, I think it was, the slasher subgenre, I mean, really at the end of the day was dead. It was dead. It was dead. And certainly by the time Halloween 6 came out and Candyman 2, Farewell to the Flesh, and, some of the later Chucky movies, I mean, it was dead. It was dead. They started to decline at the box office. There just really wasn't the pop culture interest. I mean, there was for horror fans, but they weren't reaching that general audience like they kind of did in the early 80s as well. It was dead. And then, of course, we know that Scream revitalized things and changed what slashers could be in 1996. So I get asked a lot, do I think there's going to be another new villain and an iconic villain? And the answer to that is probably not. But not in the same ways. I mean, we must not forget that Victor Crowley and Hatchet, I mean, I know it's Kane Hodder, and I know there's parallels to Jason in terms of the kind of guy he is, but it's a very different story, but those movies are B movies, right? And then, of course, you have Terrifier, right? Art the Clown, Terrifier, right? Shout out to Fuzz on the Lens Productions, and Michael Levy and the fine folks over there who are doing a great job with Terrifier. But Terrifier, the very first one, was a low-budget independent film, like a lot of the early 80s movies were. This might have been a little lower budget than even those movies. And, of course, they had an Indiegogo campaign. They raised over $100,000, maybe even $200,000. I stand to be corrected on the numbers, but certainly enough to do a sequel. Terrifier 2, Art the Clown is back. Is Art iconic? Well, and speaking purely objectively here, because I have no dog in the race, I know the folks that are putting together the film, and I hope they're doing. I'm rooting for them, right? But looking at it objectively, certainly there's a lot of people making Art the Clown memorabilia and T-shirts and hats and mugs and knickknacks and doodads and trinkets and all that kind of stuff. But he's had one movie. And I think Art the Clown is becoming very well known and popular in a landscape where there's not a lot of competition, not a lot of new competition. And I'm not taking anything away from the folks of Terrifier and who putting together. Not at all. Just speaking objectively, right? Looking at the landscape. There's room for them to breathe. There's room for them to run with it. So, but that's not the question is there going to be a villain that embeds itself into the pop culture like Freddy did, like Jason did, like Michael did, even like Chucky? And I think the answer is no. On a pop culture consciousness where, everybody knows. I can go out onto the street and say, do you know who Art the Clown is? Probably 8 out of 10 people, maybe even 9 out of 10 people. I don't know. Maybe even 10 out of 10 people, depending on who I'm asking. No, I have no fucking idea what you're talking about. But if I say, do you know who Freddy Krueger is? No problem, right? And it's generally because, again, at that time, that was horror. That just was horror. I mean, again, there was more, but I'm saying for all intents and purposes, that was it. So the future of the horror genre is changing. It has changed. And the slasher subgenre, I mean, what was horror is now a subgenre of horror. I mean, it always was, but it really is now. And I think the problem, and I wanted to talk about this today, so sort of give my thoughts on the questions that I get asked a lot. You know, slasher genres don't generally do well at the box office. But Dave, Halloween 2018 made too. Yeah, but let's look at this for a minute. It's Halloween, and it was riding on a tidal wave of nostalgia, right? And it was the first, I mean, it's not just that it was a slasher movie. I mean, really at the end of the day, Halloween 2018 being a slasher was really probably played no role in its financial box office success. What really drove the success of that movie was nostalgia, it was the first Halloween movie since 1989's Halloween 5 to be actually released in the month of October. I mean, you know, hey, there's a novelty idea. Let's release a Halloween movie during Halloween time. So you got to take that into account. Jamie Lee Curtis was back. She's a huge draw to that original franchise, right? Nick Castle was back, even though they didn't tell you Nick was only going to have one. They were pumping him as Nick is back, Nick is back, Nick is back, because they knew they wanted to ride that way. They wanted to get that into your head, even though it was James Jude Courtney 99% of the time. John Carpenter was back. I mean, Jesus, John Carpenter is back. He's doing the music. Oh, fuck, he's doing the music. There was many variables at play of why that movie was very successful. And it wasn't a complete dumpster fire. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like Halloween 5 or Halloween Resurrection or Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, or dare I say even Rob Zombie's Halloween 1. You know what I mean? In my opinion, it wasn't a dumpster fire. You've heard me say that I didn't enjoy the movie in the ways that I wanted to. Like I said, I gave it like a C plus. Just really wasn't, you know, it was a fine slasher movie, but it just wasn't a very good Halloween movie. You've heard me talk about all this. But it was, you know, it was cool, right? Nostalgia, right? Same thing will happen if they do a sequel to the Friday the 13th Part 4. They pretend that 5, 6, 7, 8, and they just do it a sequel to Part 4. And Corey Feldman comes back, or they bring back Tom Matthews. You know what I mean? Or you say the same thing, box office, ding, 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 ding. It's nostalgia. It's the era we live in, right? Same with Freddy Krueger. But those are already proven IPs. They're already proven properties. It's almost cheating in some ways. You know what I mean? It's not somebody new. It's not like some horror movie called, I don't know, Hacksaw. You know, and the trailers are pretty good. Look pretty good. Look all right, right? Hacksaw, just when you thought it was safe to go back to the distillery. You know, I don't know, something like, you know, some new thing. You think that's going to make $255 million at the worldwide box office? Probably not. The slasher subgenre in and of itself is not the draw that it was. And it hasn't been for, well, decades, you know, because the landscape of horror has changed. So I think we will see, like, you know, I mean, like if art, I mean, and again, I say this is, I mean, again, I who knows? But if Terrifier 2 was released in theaters, was picked up by, let's say, Universal, and it was released in 3,000 theaters, do I think that movie's going to make 200 mil at the box office or 100 mil at the box office? Probably not, you know, because the demand isn't there anymore. The horror has matured. And I think that's a good thing. I think horror maturing is a good thing. But will there always be room for slasher genres? I think, or sorry, the slasher movie and the slasher genre, yeah. But I just think it's sort of, it's at best, it's you know, B movie sort of territory. Because that's what they were. The original Halloween, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, the first installments of those franchises, they were B movies. Look at all the slasher movies from the early 80s that were, you know, Prom Night and Terror Train and My Bloody Valentine and oh God, what else? Just go through the Rolodex. They're all low budget B movies. That's what slashers were. And in a world of, you know, more sophisticated, mature audiences that demand more of their horror movies on more of a mature level. When I say mature, I don't mean cerebral necessarily. I don't mean that, you know, it's got to be like necessarily psychological, although that is sort of what seems to be picking up speed a bit. I just mean that, you know, it's sort of slasher, it reached the identity of a slasher film is, you know, it's blood, guts, and gore and final girls. I mean, you know, it's got a threshold of so many times that you can do that, and the novelty wears off. You know, it's very, very niche-y now, very niche-y. And I just think audiences are more mature and demand, even if they realize it or not, demand more from their movies and demand more from their horror movies. You know, and it's not, again, I mean, I'm not trying to, I mean, if that's your favorite, my favorite is slashes, that's great. But box office numbers, Halloween 2018 aside, whenever there is some slasher that is released in the theaters, it doesn't do that well. It doesn't do that well. So I don't think the bar should be, when we're talking about slashers and when we're talking about the interest from the movie-going audience, I almost don't think it's fair to the litmus test or the benchmark to be any of the big three, especially today with nostalgia. I just don't think that is a good, well, you see Halloween today, you see Friday the 3rd, you see, everybody, they want slashers. No, they want Freddy Krueger. No, they want Jason Voorhees. No, they want Michael Myers. That's what they want. Look at Child's Play. Chucky didn't do very well. Now, were there factors in there? Yes. Mancini wasn't involved, and obviously, what's his face there? Brad Dourif wasn't doing the voice of Chucky, and it was a reinvention, a reboot. Sure, yeah, okay. Does that play a factor in maybe the low box office? Yeah, it might. But the fact of the matter is that people didn't. It didn't. I don't think we're going to get another one in that. I don't believe that people are pining for slasher for the slasher genre. I think people just want Michael and Freddy and Jason. Because I think if somebody new was to come along, Hacksaw, just when you thought it was safe to go back to the distillery. Will you go see it? Yeah, you might. Is it going to make $40 million opening weekend? Probably not. Is it going to make $40 million in its entire domestic run? Probably not. I mean, maybe you might give it a boost if you release it in October or November or January. But I mean, you release that thing in the middle of May, it's going to get buried. So I just don't think the future of the slasher genre is really sort of where it is now. It's B-movie, and I'm talking about like it doesn't mean they're not, look, there are a lot of crossovers, right? You can have a psychological slasher, you can have, I don't know, an exploitative supernatural slasher, I mean, you can mix and match, you can double dip, I mean, all you want. But at its roots, like the pure slasher, like the original Friday the 13th, or even Friday the 13th Part 2, or Elm Street, or, Terror Train, or My Bloody Valentine, or Evil, Silent Night, Evil Night, or Deadly Night. I mean, Silent Night, Evil Night was the original Black Christmas title. Silent Night, Deadly Night, I think is the one I'm thinking of. I mean, those movies are low budget B horror movies, and B doesn't mean bad. Doesn't mean like, I don't mean B as in bad. I just mean they're low budget, And I think sort of the slasher genre hit its peak in the mid 80s, and that's it. And then it's had a revitalization in the mid to late 90s because of Scream. And Scream 2, and then Scream 3, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, and Urban Legend, and Halloween H2O, and, I mean, it had a bit of a kick up again. But it's never really resurged after that. There's always a slasher movie coming out. There's always one you can find, Bloody Disgusting's always talking about something, right? But I don't think it will ever be what we saw in the 1980s. I think it's just, it's evolution, or as some of the British like to say, evolution. It's the evolution of the genre, of audiences, of what we want, what we expect, what we demand. And, it's one of those, Hans Gruber says F-13 1980 was a whodunit, actually. Well, that's part of it. I wouldn't just end the sentence there. It was a whodunit. Well, no, it wasn't a whodunit. Knives Out's a whodunit. Friday the 13th had the element to it, right? Like you hear me say that Friday the 13th has a psychological component to it. But the overall blanket, the subgenre that it's in, it's a slasher movie. It's blood, guts, and gore. That's what it is. There's little components to it. But it's certainly, I wouldn't put Friday the 13th on a shelf next to, Knives Out at the video store back in 1998 or something like that. I mean, that's, So I think I'm noticing patterns, and that's why I wanted to talk about it, is that when people reach out to me, like I said, I often get asked, do you think if we'll ever have another iconic slasher villain again? And do you think this? And, I want slashers and this, that. And then, but when I hear, and look, could a new iconic slasher villain whet the appetite of its audience and restart something? And then people really, maybe, but slashers had a broader, and again, I'm not saying they weren't nichey back in 1978 to 85. They were still nichey then too, but they're very niche now. And I just don't see the appeal being there for the slasher genre. There would have to be another, in order for the slasher genre to be mainstream again and to really sort of become popular again amongst the general, large general movie-going audience, there would almost have to be another revitalization, like another reinvention, but still being kind of true to the roots of what it is, like what Scream did in 1996, right? I mean, you have to remember when Scream came out in 96, I mean, yes, it's a slasher, but it's got a very specific identity to it, right? It's a spoofy slash, self-aware slash satirical sort of, it's not like spoof like Airplane or, Naked Gun spoof. But, when you have Wes Craven playing the janitor at the high school in a Freddy Krueger sweater with a hat on with his name as Fred, I mean, come on. I mean, that's like, hello? Think, McFly, think. Love that movie. Hey, that's celebrating 35 years this year. Back to the Future, for those of you that might be confused. So, it made you look at the slasher genre from a different point of view, from a different perspective. Made boatloads of money at the box office. And it was fun. It was fun. It was fun for general audiences, right? And I think that's sort of what would have to happen again. Now, what that is, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the shtick would be, because I just don't see slashers like we know them to ever be as popular as they were. Unless you're doing something that is riding on a nostalgia, like, Scream or, Texas Chainsaw. But even the Texas Chainsaw films don't do that well. They don't do that well at the box office. I mean, you look at the 2013 film that came out, and then there was one that came out after that. They don't do that well. Well, it's because they're shitty movies. Well, yeah, but you got to go to the movie first to find out if it's shitty. You know what I mean? I mean, that's kind of, I mean, you can read the reviews, you can watch the trailer and then not go, sure. And I've done that many times, but they don't do that well, and Friday the 13th, 2009 did very well opening weekend, dropped significantly. The reason why they never made another Friday the 13th or Elm Street was because it didn't have the legs, Friday the 13th, 2009, you may like it, but, that movie did well, did fine, opening weekend. And then it just kind of went, and never, not enough for Paramount to say, oh my God, we've got a series here. Same with Warner Brothers, I think, who have the rights or had the rights, to Elm Street. Same thing. Now, that was 2009, 2010, respectively. I mean, before the wave of nostalgia we're in now. So, and obviously it wasn't bringing back original folks, right? It wasn't bringing back, Amy Steele and Adrian King. I realize I said their actor name and the character name from two different people. But you know what I mean, right? Because, it's just so like, no, I don't think we will, because the landscape of the slasher subgenre has comfortably, organically, I might add, comfortably through the natural progression of the evolution of horror, comfortably nestled into a very niche subgenre. And in order to take that subgenre and make it as popular as it was in the general pop culture, like in the 1980s, I just don't see it. I just don't see it. It's and I think Art the Clown is a good example of that. Cool character, love the look, really awesome. But it's niche, right? And it's living in that niche world. It's not like, mainstream media is talking about it. Because media has grown. Media is not what it was now. We're on the 24-hour news cycles and have been for like 25 years now, 30 years. Everything is current, and just, it's changed. The whole entertainment landscape has changed. And I just don't think that the slasher subgenre will ever be what it was. It will always remain in a very sort of niche area, I think. And horror continues to evolve. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing because, and now I speak really personally on this, I'll be 41 in May. And, I love, I can enjoy a slasher movie too. But I've grown since I was 8. And what scares me, or what entices me, what moves me as a moviegoer and as a horror fan, is, unless it's Elm Street, Halloween, or Friday the 13th, something that I already have an emotional, nostalgic connection to, I don't really care about the slasher genre at large. Now, I know there's a lot of people my age and older who love it. It's their favorite. That's great. That's great. I'm just talking about me here, right? I've sort of not grown. Well, maybe I have sort of grown out of it in some ways, because I want my mind. I feel like I like the direction that horror is going in. And even though I wasn't really a big fan of Us, and I actually preferred Get Out more than Us, I do like those risks that are being taken. I do like the psychological route. I loved Hereditary. And although I didn't like Midsommar as much as I liked Hereditary, I enjoyed it for what it was. I like those types of films. I like being challenged psychologically and making me think, and because those are, and this was proven, by the way. I had a McRae Live, a couple of weeks ago, where I was talking about how horror movies affect the brain, and how there were studies that were done, I think over in Switzerland or something. It's one of my McRae Lives a couple of weeks ago. You can go and check it out. And they did studies on, I think it was 250 people or something like that. And they measured the brain activity and the responses from certain parts of the brain. It's a whole scientific thing. You got to go back to the video. I read a bit of the article, and they were measuring the responses, right? And this is objective. Like, you can't have your opinion on this. This is science. This is objectively measuring someone's emotional response through the brain, so it doesn't matter what you think, this is, we can measure this. And the highest level of response was from the shit that I talk about all the time, which is that unknown factor, that, creepy, eerie sort of, that psychological, unknown approach. And I said it very layman's terms there. You got to go read the article or watch my video. But it was really cool and fascinating. And as I get older, I because that's what is truly scary. Listen, not that slashers can't be scary, but Blood, Guts, and Gore isn't necessarily scary. It's cool and gross and whoa, you know what I mean? And yeah, sure, that first Saw movie was like, whoa, and that first Hostel movie was like, whoa. But of course, they wore thin pretty quick. When you as a filmmaker can get inside the psyche of your audience and really fuck them up, you know, without showing anything on screen or alluding to things that's the best shit. And the science proves it, you know, because of the emotional response from the brain and there's science behind it. It's not like it's, you know, I can go deep, you know, fight or flight and the emotional sort of natural evolution, how we're biologically programmed to react to certain, you know, senses of danger or unknown, or, you know, it's a whole thing. And it's really fascinating. And I think that's why people like me really tend to gravitate towards that kind of horror, because it's creepy and it's eerie and it's, you know, it's got that, it elicits an emotional response from your viewer that you're not necessarily able to control. And, really, really cool. So I like the way horror is going. I appreciate the way horror is going, and it's maturing, and it's getting recognized more and more. Will the slasher? I get asked too. Do you think a slasher film will ever win an Oscar? Well, no, I don't, unless it was some sort of psychological, you know, slasher movie, or it was a psychological horror movie with slasher elements maybe. But do I think like a full-on, fleshed out, full-on just blood, guts, and gore, you know, Friday the 13th movie is going to be nominated for an Oscar? No, I don't. I mean, maybe best visual effects maybe, you know, or something like that. But no, I don't think so. Because it's not that kind of movie. It's just, they're not those kind of movies. You know, they're just very, you know, niche-y. And they were niche then too, but the horror genre was, you know, still discovering itself, right? There was a lot of exploitative films in the 1970s. I mean, Black Christmas was retitled, you know, Silent Night, Evil Night for its United States theatrical release because they thought, you know, back in 1974, they didn't want people to think that it was some sort of black, as in the color of your skin, black exploitative horror movie. Black, you know, Christmas. It was some sort of like the whole cast was black or something like that. Like that's why they changed it. That's why they changed it, because they thought, well, you know, that was the world then, right? There's a lot of those kinds of movies, especially the 70s, you know, fresh off the decade of love and sex and rock and roll. I mean, there was a lot of weird shit being released. I mean, look at watch Eddie Murphy's film Dolomite Is My Name. I mean, you know, there's a lot of weird fucking movies back then that were being released. So horror was really in this discovery, that this new sort of wow the films, and we can take risks, and yeah, we might, you know, run into some resistance and not be able to, you know, release certain things, but it was one of those things where, you know, so many, and I see Jason Wiley, this is the thing, Psycho had 4 nominations. Well, yeah, that's because Psycho's not Friday the 13th. Psycho's a 1960 Alfred Hitchcock film. It's considered a slasher movie because of the thing that happens in it. But you watch them. Have you seen Psycho lately? It's not a slasher movie like Elm Street is. It's more of a psychological. It's a classic Hitchcock. It's like Rear Window or you know, and I don't mean to come down on you, but I just find that people say, well, Psycho had 4 Oscar nominations. Yeah, Psycho did, because it's a great fucking movie. That's why. And because there's so many things, you know, you have to look at the kind of movie Psycho is, Jason, okay? And you got to remember 1960, right? 1960. Okay, this is long before blood, guts, and gore. I mean, they shot it in black and white because they wanted to be able to get past the ratings, because they knew if they shot it in color, they would also have some problems with that, and that blood would look better in black and white. It was the first movie, at least the first North American film. Remember this, Jason. Remember this. It was one of, if not the first North American film in motion picture history to show a toilet flushing. This is where we are. The first North American film in history to show a toilet flushing, right? So think about that, right? Think about the time. Think of the movie. Think of the scene, right? It's a slasher movie, but you got to think about what's involved. And what I just said a few moments ago, too, was I said that would a slasher movie win an Oscar? I said, probably not. And then I said, well, unless it's like maybe a psychological slasher, like a psychological film with slasher elements thrown in, which is what Psycho is. But because it's 1960, what was possible and what you could get away with, you couldn't do. I mean, listen, had Psycho come out in 1984, it would probably be a very different movie and probably would not have been nominated for the Oscars. So you have to keep those things in mind too, right? To just say that Psycho was nominated for 4 Oscars and therefore that proves that, and I'm not necessarily suggesting that you are saying this, but to say that Psycho was nominated for 4 Oscars and therefore slashers can nominate it for Oscars, but it's not black and white like that. Like there's variables at play of why Psycho may have been nominated for 4 Oscars and why, you know, A Nightmare on Elm Street was not. You know what I mean? So you have to keep those things in mind, right? It's not it's not black and white. There's many shades of gray and reasons why those things, why that is. But Psycho, yeah, is a fantastic film, and it falls into the slasher genre by default because of what that was at the time. It was considered as, if Psycho had come out today, the exact movie today, that exact film today, beat for beat, that wouldn't be a slasher movie. It'd be a psychological film, you know. So it's slasher by default because of the era that it was released in. But yeah, no, but you know, it's one of those things where I think horror is evolving. Obviously, it will continue to evolve, and the slasher subgenre will continue to be niche. I don't. So for all of you who have messaged me and asked about, you know, do you think we'll ever see the slasher genre like it was? I don't think we'll see the slasher genre like it was. I think that if they can get their act together and release a Friday the 13th movie, with, you know, and maybe do what they did with that series like they did with Halloween, I think you will probably see a Friday the 13th resurgence. If they can do the same thing with A Nightmare on Elm Street, I think you might see a Nightmare on Elm Street resurgence. But if Halloween Kills and Ends is good, then that'll be great. And because Halloween 2018 made a boatload of money at the box office, and they're once again releasing a sequel in the month of October, and Jamie Lee Curtis is back, John Carpenter is back, they're picking up, will Halloween Kills do very well at the box office? Yep, it will. It should. It should do well. Will it make $254 million worldwide? I don't know. I don't know about that, but will it do well? Yes, it should. It should. But they all have one common denominator, and that is that they're all old school shit coming back. And that's why, as much as Terrifier and Art the Clown, shout out to Fuzz and the Lens Productions again, I'm pulling for it, man. I really am. Because although, you know, Terrifier, it's good for the slasher genre. I don't think Art the Clown will ever be a household name like Freddy or Jason or something like that, unless, you know, a distributor sees Terrifier 2 and is like, holy fucking shit, let's pick this up and distribute that sucker, and it does well, and then maybe from there it's like, oh my god, and they do all sorts of like Art the Clown shit, and they really maybe, but as is right now, he's popular in the niche horror subgenre slasher space because of all the trinkets and t-shirts and hats and shit that's being made of him, and because the landscape is wide open. There's not a lot of competition right now. So, and he's a cool character, you know, he's cool. Yeah. You know, he's I really want them to do. I really hope Terrifier 2 is good and does well, and because it's good for the slasher subgenre. But I just don't think we're ever going to see what we saw with slashers again. At least not unless there is a revitalization. There is a resurgence. Here's the slasher genre, and it clearly is slasher. It's more slasher than it is anything else. How about this angle? You know what I mean? Who knows? I don't know. I'd love to know what you guys think the future of the slasher subgenre is. What do you guys think? If you're watching after the fact, comment below and let me know in the chat room. In the comments section. I would really like to know. Let's move over to the chat room and see what you guys are talking about. All my McRazies in there. And Jason, if you're watching, oh, there you are. No, there you are. You're up there. Hey, if you're watching, again, I wasn't coming down on you, buddy. I just wanted you, sometimes, I'm hard on you McRazies because, I want you to think, hey, I get what you're saying, man, but think about this, right? Think about this and, think of that. But hey, I get you just, love, buddy. Love. It's all love, man. All right, let's the chat room. Hey, a couple of super chats did come in. Let me go over to the super chats and get these before I forget. So, a very nice, generous super chat came in from Daniel Scott. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate it. Hey, Dave, huge fan of your content. I don't believe we will ever see a top 3 like Michael, Freddy, or Jason ever again. The slasher game has changed in a way that just can't match what the past has achieved. Well, Daniel, I agree, man. I agree for many of the reasons that I said here. You know what I mean? It's the landscape is just so different now, and audiences are maturing, and horror is maturing, and horror is evolving. The slasher subgenre will always exist, but they're really sort of a true, again, now we see slasher elements. We do, right? There's a lot of horror movies that are released that have slasher elements. You could say that, Get Out had a bit of slasher element in there. You could say that, Us had some slasher elements. But there's certain tropes and certain things that define a slasher, right? And those, I should have talked about this earlier, but slashers, the purest definition of the genre would be usually there's a final girl, right? And usually that final girl is, teenager, college age. Usually the slasher genre involves a single killer murdering and stalking teenagers or college-aged students, right? And then usually there's a lot of blood. Now, blood and gore can vary from slasher movie to slasher movie. Not every slasher film has to have loads of blood, guts, and gore, but that is an element to it. There's a lot of jump scares, et cetera, et cetera. But the one sort of common trope that runs through all of them usually is some sort of final girl, and maybe she's a bit nerdy, maybe she's a virgin, maybe she's, girl next door, you know what I mean? Those usually are sort of the tropes. And that specific kind of movie, horror has matured from that, so I agree with what you're saying. Not that they don't have a place, but I just don't think we'll ever see it like we did. Super chat comes in from Jack Ellis. Thank you, buddy. Says, hey, Dave, thoughts on Scream 5? Scream 5, I don't know. Again, it's like, I just don't know where you go with it. Look, if they make a Scream 5, then they would... It feels like they would have to reinvent themselves again, because the original Scream was reliant on a very specific shtick, right? There's a very specific identity to Scream 5. And that is, the telephone calls, hello, Sydney, and, blah, 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 telephone calls. Well, of course, that was the 90s, right? And if you're old enough like me to remember the 90s, the 80s, you had landlines. I didn't have a cell phone in high school. I didn't even have a cell phone in college. And very few people did. And it's not like I went to college in the 70s. I was in the college in the late 90s, early 2000s. So, and nobody had cell phones. The odd person did. It was, the flip, old Nokia phones or something. But I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't need it. I didn't get my first cell phone until after college, actually, in 2001. And it was one of those old Nokia phones. But yeah, and I didn't have my first email address till I was in my last year of high school. I mean, the world, the technology keeps expanding exponentially. And so because Scream is very reliant on a certain shtick, that shtick needs to evolve, and usually it evolves into the world of utilizing the technology that's on hand. And now it's cell phones, right? But like, as you've heard me say 1,000 times, how often do you pick up your cell phone when you see it's an unknown number? How often do you do it? I never do it. If I see a number that I don't recognize, I don't pick it up, and if it's important, they're going to leave a message. And if they don't leave a message, well, not my problem. You didn't leave a fucking message. What, am I going to call back a number I don't know just because you called? No, not at all. Right? So, nobody really, and like you've heard me say 1,000 times too, these are not phones. They're computers. They're pocket computers. They're not phones. We're very rarely on the phone going, hey, Bob, what's going on? Hey, it's Wolfman Gottenarts. Hey, Barry, what's happening, man? What's going on? Nobody talks on the phone. Nobody does that. I mean, people do that, but I'm just saying, generally, right? You're always like this. You're doing this and you're scrolling. You're in bed and you're scrolling. They're computers. They're pocket computers. We have computers in our pockets that just so happen to also make phone calls if we wanted to on the off chance one Sunday afternoon. So, the whole idea of the shtick and the gimmick of the phone call, it's easier to trace calls now. It's easier to find the identity of people now. It's not what it was. So in regards to Scream 5, they would, if they don't, well, even if they do, if they reboot it, or even if they don't reboot it, I think you'll see the technology come in and play a big role. Very much like that movie Unfriended, right? Which I actually quite liked. I actually quite liked it. I wasn't expecting much. I watched it a couple years ago. Pot was on Netflix. I'm like, whatever. I turned it on. I was like, it's not great, but I believed in the characters. I believed that these people were all friends and that shit was going down. But they were utilizing today's technology, Skype and, WhatsApping or whatever the fuck they were using. So I think if they were to reboot Scream, you'd see something like that. Maybe, I don't know, somebody's invading you on Twitch or something. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do, but I'm just saying the further we go along into the 2020s, the harder it's going to believe that teenagers today are picking up their cell phones going, hello. I mean, it's kind of harder to believe now. So I don't know. I mean, and we really haven't had confirmation on what it's going to be yet. Spyglass Entertainment, who I think has the rights to it, I've heard rumblings that it's going to be a direct sequel to Part 4. I've heard rumblings that it's just going to be a complete reboot. And it's like, who knows? If it's a reboot, then, oh boy, we're in trouble. Maybe not though. You never know. Super chat. Mark Warling, thanks buddy, says, hope we get to see Halloween Kills this October because of the virus. Hollywood may not release it just like the Bond movie. Prepare, Dave. Virus. Well, we're still quite a ways away from October. So I think it's a little too early to expect that Halloween Kills will be moved. And I heard online that, and again, I mean, this might be specific to certain viruses, but I heard that in the warmer months, though it usually generally is always warm out in LA, but certainly here in Canada, during our warmer months, which would be, well, it's still pretty chilly right now, although there's no snow. But generally once April hits, April here is a kind of a hit and miss month. It can be really nice and kind of crappy. But then once May hits, like May is nice, June is nice, July, August, September, and then of course October is fall and all that kind of stuff. But during the warmer months, I hear that the virus, the outbreaks of certain things tend to calm down because it can't survive or something like that. I don't know. And of course, generally people are not as sick as they are in the warmer months as they are in the colder months, and can't pass on things and blah, blah, blah. So who knows? I mean, we'll see when the weather warms up a bit here in North America. Of course, if you live in Australia, you're getting ready to go into your winter. But yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Fingers crossed, man. Classic Halloween sends in a super chat, says, Dave, I'm so glad McRae's has taken off. Would you ever do a top 10 video for Halloween side characters? That would be neat. You're amazing. Thank you, Classic Halloween. That's kind of cool. A top 10 Halloween side characters. Yeah, okay, maybe. Maybe. I'll put that on the list of maybes. That's kind of cool. Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that. Super chat comes in from Die Hard Drummer 84, says, stalking kill scene in parking garage in Kills. Oh, I see what you're saying. Do I think there's going to be a stalking or kill scene in a parking garage in Halloween Kills? I don't know. Maybe there will be. I don't know. Do you guys think there's going to be a stalking scene in a parking garage in Halloween? I just hope there's a stalking scene. That's what I hope for. But we'll see. What do we got here? Wolfman's got nard says the thing about Chucky is if you go out and ask those same people if they know who the character of Chucky is, they'd have no idea. Well, that's a good point. Wolfman. I think it's probably not as I don't think it's quite as blunt as you're making it. I think if you were to ask some people, because Chucky is sort of, there's memes of, Ed Sheridan looks like an adult Chucky. You know what I mean? There's Chucky's pretty, not as, I actually think Chucky, I think you'd have a better time of, see, Chucky, you don't have to say, because it doesn't have a last name. Well, I mean, the actual guy did, right? But Chucky himself, he's a good guy doll. I don't think Chucky had a last name. You could go out and say Chucky, and people might know who you're talking about. You go out and say Michael, you've got to say Myers. You got to say Myers, right? Freddy's kind of like Chucky. Jason, you might have to say Jason Voorhees, although Voorhees is probably not as commonly known as Krueger. If you were to ask the average person on the street, what the guy in A Nightmare on Elm Street, the killer, Freddy, what's his last name? I bet you get a lot of people saying Krueger. If you ask the average person on the street, the killer in Friday the 13th, his name is Jason. What's his last name? I bet you get a lot of people going, I don't know. You know what I mean? I think Freddy Krueger would be the most common, followed by Michael Myers, then Jason, then Chucky maybe. But I get what you're saying, though. Let's see. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any super chats. No, I did not. Okay, good. Good to see everybody here. Hey, 183 people watching on this Friday afternoon. Great to see people in the chat. All you McRazies having a good time. Duke Fleet says, Dave, do you know the Italian film Bay of Blood, also known as Twitch of the Death Nerve? It came out in the early 70s and is considered a source of inspiration for Friday the 13th. No, I've never heard of it. So I'm not familiar with that film. I will look that up. I got to check that out. Thank you for mentioning that. Rick Baker says, I think the Halloweens, the Friday the 13th, and the Nightmare movies are taking on that same recycled flavor as the Universal monsters did in the 60s and 70s. Their heyday was from a different era. You're right. I mean, there's nothing you've said there that I really can't argue with. And when you start, entertaining the idea of doing crossovers, or hey, how about Pinhead versus Chucky versus Viagra? No, what about Freddy versus Pinhead? I mean, it's just like this. I don't like, and this is my own personal opinion on this. I don't like crossovers because they feel chintzy and cheap to me. I like to take the things, I like taking things seriously, and I can't take that seriously because there's no world where Freddy would exist in Jason's world and vice versa. It just doesn't make any sense to me. No, I mean, you can do it. They did it, and you can do it. But I'm just not a fan of it. I'm just, and I understand that they, look, you had Frankenstein versus the Wolfman. I mean, it's not uncommon for them to do that. But I don't know. I'm just not a big fan of it. But I get what you're saying. I do get what you're saying. Matthew Roberts says, what do you think about the new Child's Play series coming later this year to Sci-Fi? I'm looking forward to checking it out. I have not been a big fan of what Don Mancini has done with Chucky and Child's Play. Now, look, I get that, what was it, Cult of Chucky, Curse of Chucky, whatever the last one was. I get that, it's not Seed of Chucky. You know what I mean? It's not Bride of Chucky. I mean, I get it's not as ridiculous as that. And it seemed like Mancini was trying to salvage what he could and instill some sort of authenticity and a little bit of nuanced, actual scary suspense maybe, or, rather than making a mockery of Chucky and he's this whatever the fuck he was in those movies. I mean, I get that they're better, but I just think Chucky is just like, I was really interested and quite, I don't want to say excited. That's a little exaggerated, but I did look forward and I to seeing the remake of Child's Play, and I enjoyed it. I think it was great. I still like the original better, but certainly I think what they did was cool. It was interesting, and I would be okay to see another one. I don't think they're gonna make another one because it just didn't do that well at the box office at all. So the demand is just not there. And now, unless this thing tears it up or has been tearing it up on DVD and Blu-ray and 4K and just makes astronomical sales, and when it comes to Netflix or whatever, it's just, oh my God. I mean, maybe Netflix will do something. I mean, maybe Netflix will obtain the rights and be like, hey, fucking Child's Plays, this thing's been that's fucking tearing it up. It's been our, in the top 5 most watched thing, which they never release. Netflix never releases their numbers, which I just think is really lame. I mean, I just like, come on. I want to see it. But anyway, I mean, maybe they do something. Because I could see Netflix doing something. But I am curious to see what Mancini's going to do with this new series. I think a Child's Play series is interesting. I think that's probably where you could go to try and keep it fresh, because because your movies are no longer theatrical. Not that they have to be, especially in today's day and age, with now Netflix getting in on the game and things like that. I mean, clearly the production value of streaming movies is top notch. Not all of them. I mean, the vast majority of them are garbage. But every now and then you come across one that's like, oh, that's really good. I just don't know where else you go, and hopefully he's got a cool idea, I'm cautiously optimistic, like I said, I want things to be good, man, but yeah, I don't know. I just think Mancini's run this fucking thing into the ground, but we'll see. Robert Kitzmiller says, in Black Christmas, who was killing people outside the sorority house? Was Billy going in and out from the attic? I always wondered what was happening there. Well, I think the only, if I'm not mistaken, the only body that was discovered outside of the sorority house was that kid in the park, right? I think so. We never saw his body, right? We just, you were told. And again, I stand to be corrected. I believe that probably happened earlier that night. I mean, the movie opens with Billy with a POV, right? And he's entering the sorority house. And he is, but it's nighttime, Now, I don't know what time it is, but it's nighttime. The cop, Robert Kitzman says the cop also. The cop in the, in the car, in the car? Was it in the car? I think the officer in the car was found. You're right. Yes, you're right. Was Billy going in and out? Right, and there was the kid in the park, definitely Billy. Happened like earlier that day or earlier that night, right? Definitely. Like maybe the opening of the movie, he's just coming from that. Maybe he just murdered the kid in the park and now he's made his way to the sorority house. I mean, that totally. The cop in the car, it's possible. It's possible he could have, I mean, listen, I think that's possible. Just because we don't see him do it, I think it's possible. Or maybe it was somebody else. Maybe you'll have to tune into It's Me, Billy. I don't know. But no. I think I think you were supposed to believe that it was Billy. And now the logistics of that, I got to watch the movie again. But certainly the kid for sure, the kid in the park. Yeah, I mean, he probably just came from there. That's what I would say at the beginning of the movie. Frank Riker says, Dave, I think the slasher will, and thank you for the super chat, Frank. I think the slasher will become dormant for a bit, but Hollywood will always make movies about real life serial killers like Bundy and Dahmer. Unfortunately, they will exploit their crimes. Yeah. That's the risk you run, isn't it, Frank? When you are, because I mean, listen, we're all, well, at least I am. I can't say we're all, but I am fascinated by the real life crime, as a lot of us are. And I'm so fascinated by it that in 2018, when I went to Los Angeles for the Voice Arts Awards, it was my third nomination at that time. And, but we made I went for the Voice Arts Awards. I was there for the Halloween convention. And so we were there for like a week or whatever. And my girlfriend and I actually drove up to Spawn Ranch. Now, there's no ranch there anymore. It's just a field. But we drove to Spawn Ranch, which is the ranch where Charles Manson and his followers lived. And Spawn Ranch was an old movie studio back in like the 40s or 50s or something, where they shot Westerns. Anyways, Spawn Ranch is it's not actually Spawn Ranch. Obviously they built that, but that's in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So when you see that location, that's what it used to look like. It did used to look like that. Well, now it's just a big empty field and hill and shit, and it's up a bit north of Los Angeles. And we drove over to it. We found it. We drove over to it. We went down. We walked down, and we walked to where Manson used to sit on this rock and play the guitar and shit. And it was wild. It was a really interesting experience to be there, and to be standing there, and it's not like we were having it. I mean, my girlfriend and I weren't like having a rip roaring time going, oh, this is so cool. It wasn't like that. It was just sort of very reflective, and peaceful though. Very peaceful. We were the only two there. There's a little bit of a cave too, where I think was it Life magazine or something? Some of his followers were, or maybe it was People. I can't remember. There was a photo of a bunch of his followers, not Manson, under this cave or whatever. We found that. Really cool stuff. Anyway, that's a side note. But certainly it's interesting to find or to learn about these people. But you're right. There is that line that you cross, because movies have to be entertaining. Like, unless you're doing a documentary, movies have to be entertaining on some sort of level. And you need to entertain your audience. So where do you take creative liberties and freedom, and what do you keep true? Sometimes that can happen too. But I get what you're saying, man. Super chat comes in from Oliver Mercer. Thank you, Oliver. Really appreciate you supporting the channel on that level. Hey, Dave, what are your thoughts regarding ideas for films? When they go into the for a minute, I thought that said bedroom ideas. That's a whole other idea right there, Oliver. When they go into the boardroom, ideas usually get changed to suit the modern market today. Do you think they affect the overall product? Well, there's a number of reasons why, when you have a writer's room, it's a brainstorming session. And there's usually, depending on how many are in there, but let's just say there's 5 people in there. And you have a whiteboard and you're going through ideas. But sometimes ideas can grow in there, but they can get squashed by the studios as well. No, we can't do that. We don't have the budget for that. Now, that's not a good thing to do. Today's political climate, I don't think that's a good thing to do. Hey, today's political climate, you make sure you do that. Go the opposite way as well. But do you think they affect the overall product when they go into the boardroom? Ideas usually get changed to suit the modern market today. Like I was just saying, do I think they affect the overall product? Yes, I think they can. Because when, like, my whole thing is, anybody should be able to make a movie however they want, right? Whatever they want to do. But that doesn't mean that it's going to resonate with an audience. The best movies, unless they're biopics, right, where it has to be on the nose to a certain degree because you're telling a factual story. If your movie feels preachy, and of course I'm speaking to myself, some people might like being preached at and making feel like they're being told how to think and what to think. I'm sure there's people that love that. But if your movie feels too preachy, feels too on the nose, that doesn't mean people are just because you put it out there doesn't mean people are going to like it, accept it, want it, need it, or enjoy it. But you should be allowed to put it out there. Of course, it depends. Obviously, there's degrees of this. But yes, I think putting your political agenda or your whatever the agenda is, it doesn't have to be political, but putting your agenda before your story and narrative, before, is like we have to weave a story so we give this message. I just think that's putting the cart before the horse. The story should always come first, and the best messages delivered are those that are left open for interpretation and left up to the audience to make up their own mind. Now, that doesn't mean that that the director or the writer maybe doesn't have something solid in mind. But the best messages are often, and that doesn't mean that you can't watch a movie and I think they're leaning this way. Like, it's clear that they're leaning this way. It's clear that they're leaning that way. But they tackle the perspectives fairly convincingly and equally. And they leave it up to you to make up your own mind. I love those types of movies. I don't like movies that are trying to tell me what to think, how to think, or how I should think. Because, inevitably it ends up failing. I think that was one of the biggest disservices they did with Black Christmas, and look, I think Sophia Takal and April Wolf, I believe her co-writer is, I never ever thought they shouldn't make the movie they made. Look, if you want to make that movie with that message, if you want to not make it R and make it PG-13 so you can get younger girls into the audience, that's fine. You should be allowed to do that. Just so you know that, I think you're doing yourself a disservice because you're putting the agenda before anything else. And I think calling it Black Christmas was an insult, and I say that because I think they, it may have been okay. It may have been, received okay if it had been called something else, Sleigh Girls, Sorority Row 5. I don't know, just something else. Or maybe it's a remake of Sorority Row. Again, I know, but I just think that it feels chintzy, it feels shoehorned in, it feels preachy. And anytime you do that, if you're making your creative decisions around trying to mold pop culture and a political perspective, and unless you're a biopic, I'm just not a fan of that. I want to be entertained, and I want to be challenged with my thoughts. I don't want you to not say anything, but leave it up to me. Leave it up to me. That's how I feel anyway. Obi-Wan Kenobi says, hello there. Hey, Dave. I know I do that every time. Hey, Dave, a bit off topic, but what's your favorite Back to the Future of the three? And I want to know, do you like the song Power of Love or Johnny Be Good more from the movies? That's a cool question. Well, my favorite is definitely the original, Back to the Future 1985. It actually goes in order. My favorite is the original, followed by 2, followed by 3. I was never a big fan of 3. I don't know. I've grown to like it more now that I've gotten older, but certainly the first one is my favorite. And I would say, I think look, I love Huey Lewis in the News. Have me some Huey Lewis in the News any day of the week. And The Power of Love is a great song. There's also another Power of Love song, a slow song by an artist by the name of Jennifer Rush. I'm totally dating myself here. The Whispers in the Morning. Celine Dion actually redid that in the early 90s. And some people thought that was an original by her, but it wasn't. The original, actually, I can't even say the original was Jennifer Rush. It may not have been her. But certainly that's what I first remember, that song. But we're talking about The Power of Love, the Huey Lewis in the News song from Back to the Future. Yeah, it was a great song. Great song. Love that song. I used to have that on my that's the power of love. Dun, 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 dun. I had that on my Walkman. I used to jog to that in the 90s. I know, I'm lame. But Johnny Be Good is I love how it's presented, like Michael J. Fox, like Marty is introducing them to this kind of music, like nobody's heard this kind of music before. Do you know what I mean? Like, I love that. Now, obviously, that kind of music existed way before. I mean, Elvis Presley was sort of the first guy to take that kind of music. Now, he didn't do Johnny Be Good, but I just mean that kind of music sort of mainstream. When Elvis first came onto the scene in about 1955 or so, I believe one of the first songs that went mainstream for him was "That's All Right, Mama, That's All Right," and he recorded that at Sun Records in, I think it was Nashville, I guess, and people thought he was black. And because like the blues, like rock and roll, sort of rock blues, rhythm and blues, Chuck Berry, I mean, that existed long before Elvis, but Elvis took that sort of and made it mainstream. You know what I mean? I'm totally giving you the Cliff Notes version of this, but that's, Elvis was a huge fan of Chuck Berry. And, but anyway, I'm going off on a tangent again, but I love the idea of, that Marty McFly is introducing them to this song and this kind of music. Because at the end, right, he says, like, I guess you folks are not ready for that yet, but your kids are going to love it. Like, I just love that. I just think it's kind of funny. You know what I mean? So it's like a Forrest Gump moment, right? Like, what's so great about Forrest Gump is we see this one guy actually played a part in all this history. We have Marty McFly to thank for, that music going mainstream, not Elvis, folks. I just think it's kind of funny. Or at least introducing, them to that kind of, or at least that song, right? Because it was Chuck Berry that sang that, I think, right? Didn't he sing that? It was Chuck Berry that sang the original Johnny Be Good. Yeah, I think it was him. Anyway. Or he gave the idea to Chuck Berry. Maybe that's what, I gave the idea to Chuck Berry. I just think that's so fucking funny. Make sure I don't miss any super chats. No, Oliver Mercer was the last one. Okay, good. All right, what do we got here? The artisan says, future of the slasher. He says, elevating it, making it more ambitious, character-driven, piece that is effectively scary. See the contemporary death script teaser. Always promoting your script, buddy. Right. We were talking about that earlier in the show. What is the future of the slasher subgenre? And remember that if the slasher subgenre evolves too much, it ceases to exist as the slasher genre. And then it's a multitude of things. It's a psychological thriller slasher. Like, we're talking about the slasher at its roots, right? An actual bona fide slasher film, the first Friday the 13th movie, My Bloody Valentine, Terror Train, any low budget B movie from the early 80s. That type of movie is very niche-y now, and it doesn't really exist so much anymore unless your name is Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, or Jason Voorhees, or Candyman. But again, I'm really curious. I'm really curious to see how well Candyman is going to perform at the box office. Now, it's got Jordan Peele. He produced it, right? He didn't direct it, but he produced it. Did he help write it? He might have. Anyway, the trailer looks promising, looks interesting, right? Looks like a Jordan Peele kind of movie. I'm very curious to see how well Candyman does and how well it's received. But here's what's going to be very interesting. This is what's going to be interesting. And again, I'm not saying it's not going to blow the box office away. It might. And if it's really good, it may do okay opening weekend, but may pick up steam because of good word of mouth. That might happen. But what I find interesting is sort of goes back to what we were kind of talking about, which is, the reason why Halloween made $250-something million at the box office was not because it was a slasher movie. I mean, that might be a small ingredient, but there's a lot of factors, right, which I talked about earlier in the show. Unless your name is Michael, Jason, or Freddy, now we got Candyman. Now, is Candyman? No, yeah, he's Candyman for me is look, there's Freddy, Jason, and Michael. Then there's Ghostface and Chucky. And then you have, like, your Pinhead, your Leatherface. Now, I know, Leatherface? I think Leatherface should be... Well, listen, he's iconic, but you could argue and say that he only had one good movie. I mean, he had the 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then there wasn't a sequel until the 80s with Dennis Hopper, and that was like a comedy. And then, of course, there's, part 3. But by the time part 3 came out, the slasher subgenre was on the way down. And then there's the remake in 2004. But then there really isn't a good one after that, in my opinion. So, in terms of pop culture, not personal relevance to you, I'm talking about more of a broader picture, right? Leatherface, you know what? I'll give you that. Okay, so there's Freddy, Jason, and Michael. Then there's Chucky, Leatherface, and Ghostface, right? I think that's fair. That's fair, right? I think that's fair. And then you have like your Pinhead, your Leprechaun, and I would put Candyman in there. Because, as I said, when the first Candyman came out, it was 92. The slasher genre was dead, really. And the second one, Farewell to the Flesh, wasn't really that good anyway. So I'm very curious to see how this movie does at the box office. I don't think this is going to be a $250 million picture. Will it be $100 million? I don't know. What's the budget? Let me see here. What's the budget for Candyman? Let's see if Wikipedia's got it up. Let's see if Wikipedia has the budget for Candyman up. May not even be released yet. No, it doesn't. Not sure. But let's say it's, I don't know, 25 million, let's say. Let's just hypothetically say it cost 25 million to make Candyman. Because it's not a Blumhouse film. Remember that. It's being distributed by Universal, but it's not a Blumhouse film. Let's just say it was 25 million. It's an arbitrary number. I'm just, for the sake of argument. Well, they're going to spend probably about at least double that on marketing. So you're looking at 50 million, maybe even triple that. So 75 million. So it's going to have to make like 150 million to break even. If they made that much. Or if it cost that much, I mean. I don't know. I have no idea. But it's going to have to break over. If the budget of Candyman is 25 mil and they spend, you double that for marketing at least. So you're up to like 50, you spend like another 25 mil on marketing, 50 mil, you have to pay. It'll probably have to make at least 100 mil to be successful, to break even, at least. We'll see. I don't know. I'm curious to see how well it does. I'm curious to see, okay, we know what Child's Play did. Child's Play did fuck all. Now it was a remake, but so was this one essentially. I know it's kind of a soft sequel, I get it, but Child's Play did fuck all. And so I'm very curious to see how Candyman does. It's got Jordan Peele behind it, right? From the producers of Get Out and Us. There's no doubt you're going to see that in the TV spots, and on the online ads. Yeah, okay. All right. Will it do better than Child's Play? Probably, because it might actually be just a better movie. So I'm very curious to see how that's going to do. But again, whether Candyman is at the top of the pop culture sort of, recognizability, if I could use that word, or not, it's still part of the old school slasher family. And it's not somebody new. It's not, like I said, Hacksaw. It's not somebody new. So we have to keep that in mind as well. There is a nostalgic factor to it. Let's see here. Frank Riker sends a super chat. Thank you, Frank. Says, Dave, what's your theory on why Hank's character is still alive in Green Mile? Cursed, like he said, but it doesn't explain Mr. Jingles being alive. And did you see John Coffey's death as mercy? Why is Hank still? Well, why is Hank still alive? Well, I think it's explained, right? Because it's John Coffey infected Hanks with something. And it's a catch-22, right? I'm going to give you this gift for being so kind to me and doing essentially everything you could do. It's not your fault, boss. You know what I mean? He tried, but he followed through. I think it's just in a world of hatred, especially at that time in the 30s, right? In a world of hatred and you know, despite the fact that, and that's the lesson, right? Despite the fact that he had to die and Hanks's character had to go through with it, John Coffey knew what kind of a man he was and gave him the gift of a long life. But unfortunately, the natural byproduct of that is when you live a long life, you're going to see all your friends die and the people you love die. And I love that last line. If he can make a mouse live so long, how much longer do I have? Like, I'm paraphrasing that, but like, fuck. Like, if this, because mice only live like, what, 2 or 3 years. Fuck, if this mouse, what, am I going to live to like 480? Like, what the hell, right? I think that's sort of, that's why. He infected him with something, right? And he even said it. Like, his character, well, not Tom Hanks, but, you know, the older guy playing the old Tom Hanks even said, like, he infected me with something, you know? And that's the mystery of it, right? It's sort of the gift of longevity and a long life. And he's so old, but he's relatively healthy. I love at the end of the movie, he says, what does he say? He's 100 and something or whatever it is. And you're like, whoa, you know, it's really cool. And Mr. Jingles being alive. And did you see John Coffey's Death is Mercy? That's a good question. John Coffey's Death is Mercy. It's you see, I think John Coffey, because he even said so much that he's ready to go. I don't think he would have. I mean, if he had not died. Now remember, this is 1930, right? Or 1936 or 8 or 9 or whatever it was. It's in the 1930s. If he had not died by the electric chair, and he shouldn't have died, he was innocent. He was completely innocent, 100%. He should not have been there. But, you know, look at the area of the country and at that time, I mean, you know. But I don't think he would have lasted much longer on the outside anyway. He was huge. He was a freak show. He had this power. You know, if it wasn't the electric chair, he probably would have been murdered. You know, he probably would have been murdered or shot, you know. And I think he just, at the end, I think John Coffey knew that he, you know, he wasn't going to, I mean, I'm not going to make it. I would rather die, you know. And there's a lot, now I haven't seen the movie in a while, but there's a lot of dialogue in there that alludes to that. A lot of great poetic dialogue about that moral and about that message and about that bigger philosophical outlook, you know, and it's such a brilliant movie. But yeah, Tom Hanks, I mean, his character was almost sacrificed, but that's just the natural byproduct of it. I've often said this. Hopefully that answers your question, Frank. I haven't watched The Green Mile in a couple of years, so I'm going by just what I remember, but I gotta sort of brush up on that. But you know, it's just such a, I've often been asked, as we all have, would you like to live to like 150 or would you like to live forever? And I'm like, well, only if my friends and family can live too. I mean, listen, I think we'd all love to live to like, hey, I'd love to live to, you know, 100 or 90. Well, okay, sure. Let's live to 130. But does that mean everybody else gets to live, like everybody I love gets to live to that age too? Because if I live to 130, but, you know, my girlfriend or, you know, my wife or my boyfriend or my best friend only lives to 75, well, that means I have another like another 60 years. I mean, and what the hell? And it's not really about longevity. It's about quality of life, because nobody wants to live to 130 like this. You know what I mean? Like what? So the last, you know, 60 years of our lives, we're just confined to, you know, it's about quality of life, really, at the end of the day. And I gotta watch that movie again, man. Fuck, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. All right, we'll go for another 5 minutes. Another 5 minute, folks. Another 5 minutes. We'll go here. Super chat comes in from Robert Kitzmiller. Thank you, buddy. He says, when approaching camera angles, this is gonna be a good question. Is there a specific blueprint or formulaic pattern throughout shooting that can be learned for a director to pull from? Well, there's something called a shot list. Okay, when you are making any movie, the director and the director of photography will do up what's called a shot list, and there's which eventually becomes the shooting. Like, and again, it depends on the size of the production. I mean, Bruce and I, approaching It's Me, Billy, we'll probably just have one script for everybody. Now, our script for myself and Bruce will probably have a lot of, writing on it, right? We'll have like notes and shit like that. But when you're dealing with a Hollywood production, high level film, generally the script that the actors get is not the same one that the director of photography has or that the director has. There's multiple scripts that go around depending on what your role is. When you are the director of photography, there'll be a lot of, it's generally the shot list will be on there. So for each scene, they already know how they're going to shoot it. They're not something might come to them in the spur of the moment, right? They might be like, oh dude, you know what? Is there any way we can shoot this from that angle? Because I didn't even, that happens, right? There's always spontaneous things happening on set. But when you're dealing with multi-million-dollar films, time is money. And thousands of dollars are being spent every minute. And maybe even every second, depending on the size of the production budget. So when you go to set, you're not making it up as you go along. You have what's called a shot list. And that shot list tells you the angles for which you are going to shoot this scene. So you just go ahead and you go and you do that. Now, again, that doesn't mean that things don't, spontaneous things don't happen or extra things are added in. But the blueprint that you would be referring to would be the shot list. And that is what the director and the director of photography work from, right? So they know, okay, here we are. We're on the set. Let's say on the set of It's Me, Billy, right? And our first scene here is the character of Sam opening the car door. Well, we already know how we're going to get that shot. We know it's going to be a low angle shot. It's going to be a medium shot actually from the ground here, and then we're going to cut to an over the shoulder shot. We already know all this. We're not making that up as we go along. So that's and again, that doesn't mean we're like, oh, you know what? Instead of doing that, I didn't realize that tree was there. How about we do this instead? Those things happen. But that would be it, or formulaic pattern throughout shooting that can be learned from a director. Yeah, that would be it. It's the shot list or the shot script, where it has a lot of the detailed information about the logistics of how the movie's going to be shot, what camera angles they're going to use, maybe even what lens is going to be used. So that would be it, and the actors have just a regular script per se, with all the dialogue on it. And it just reads like how you probably are familiar with one. But the DP and the director will probably have both, but certainly have a shot list, shooting script. Hopefully that answers that. Does that answer that? Hopefully it does. Let's see here. Oh, a couple more minutes. I'll just go a couple more minutes. Took a while on that super chat. Did I miss any other super chats? I don't think I did. No, I did not. All right. Let's see here. It's coming up to 12:30 in the afternoon here on this Friday. Julian Salgado says, hey, Dave, any chance of getting Cecil on the show soon to discuss any Dylan's new nightmare? Well, Cecil was just on the show a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. I mean, a month ago or so. But he was on I think it was episode 9. I had Cecil on as a guest, and we were talking, we were talking just Freddy Krueger, and we did touch on Dylan's new nightmare, but I don't have any news or updates. I mean, what I do know is this: we are shooting at the end of May in Phoenix. I am flying to Phoenix, Arizona on the 25th of May, the day after my 41st birthday, and they're already shooting that day. So as soon as I land in Phoenix, I will be transported from the airport to the set. Now, I'm not shooting anything that day. They're shooting other things, but I will be transported to the set just to hang out with everybody and revel in the creative energy of everybody on set. So I'm really, and that's all the information I have right now. I mean, there's other information I have that I can't tell you, but certainly that's it. But yes, Cecil, definitely, as it probably hits May or so leading up to that, we will definitely probably doing some things, maybe even on his channel as well. So have to remember that too. Let me see here. David Ferguson says, just getting in from work and catching the tail end again. If a new movie, Maniac, comes out out to rival the big three, how do you think you could establish the character without just repeating? It's tough, man. It's tough. I mean, that's part of it, right? it's very tough to do. You know, look, I mean, there's always characters you can create. But I just think the subgenre of the slasher, as like, you know, your Art the Clowns, your Victor Crowley's, your you know, they've tried, right? I mean, I think the first Hatchet was 2006 or 2005, somewhere in there. And look, he's had like 3 or 4 movies. Danielle Harris has been in a bunch of them, and they've been successful in their own right. But they're more B-movie than even Friday the 13th was, because the genre, the slasher subgenre has changed. So I just don't think we're ever going to see your stereotypical Freddy-esque kind of slasher character again become as iconic as those movies did, just because of the landscape of horror. The landscape of horror has changed, and we're moving more in a direction of psychological, more mature genre of horror. And I'm okay. I'm okay with it, because for me, I think that's what's truly scary. To me anyway. The Horror Fanatic says, who do you think played Michael when he was shot 6 times? Tony Moran said it was himself, but so did Jim Wilburn. I think it was Nick Castle, because Michael looks pretty tall in that scene. Well, Nick Castle's not a tall guy. He's only 5'10". I think Tony Moran's taller, and I think Jim Wilburn. I would probably say, if I was a betting man, and maybe it was Tony, maybe it was, but was probably Jim would be a good bet. I don't think it was Nick. Like the guy going like this. No, I don't think that was Nick. It was either Jim or Tony. One of the two. I don't think it was Nick. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me on episode 27 of McRae Live. You guys are amazing. I want to thank you for all tuning in here on this Friday. Thank you, everybody, for the super chats. Really appreciate that as well. If you don't hear from me between now and a standalone video and Monday, but oh yes, I'm not, Two Dudes and Some Bullshit is not going to be Monday night this week. Instead, we're doing it next Friday. I will make the official announcement probably later today or this weekend. We're doing Two Dudes and Some Bullshit next Friday night at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, because it is Friday the 13th. And we will be watching Friday the 13th, part 2. Are we watching part 2? I think we're watching part 2. Or did we just watch part 2? I can't remember. No, I don't think we did. We just watched the original. I think it was the original. Yeah, part 2. We're watching part 2, Friday the 13th, part 2 at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time next Friday the 13th, March the 13th. So that is when our next Two Dudes and Some Bullshit will be, and then we'll start in again on our regular schedule on Monday, and just getting back to that. But we wanted to sort of delay it and have it on the Friday because it's Friday the 13th. So that is the plan anyway. And so there will be no Two Dudes on Monday, but then on Tuesday morning on McRae Live, the plan is to get Tony Michael on McRae Live as my guest. And it'll sort of feel like an unorthodox kind of two dude show, but I want to interview Tony, and I want to find out more about his life as a professional photographer, and as and sort of, you know, the man behind the lens. So that will be at least the plan is right now. These things are always subject to change because of schedules and things like that, but the plan right now is no two dudes on Monday. Tony will be my guest on McRae Live on Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock, and our Two Dudes show will be pushed to Friday next week because of Friday the 13th, and we really want to tackle that. So just want to let everybody know that, who is in the chat room, who is still watching, but I will make the official announcement later this weekend at some point. All right, yes, that's going to do it for me. Guys, have a great rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend. Thank you for supporting the channel, all you McCrazies. You guys are amazing. I will talk to you guys soon. All righty. Cheers.